Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Heath. I'm a long-haul trucker, or at least I used to be. For years, it was just me, my rig, and the road, a life I thought I loved. Sure, it's tough being away from your family weeks at a time, but you do it for them, you know? For Marcy, my wife of 10 years, and for my two girls, Grace and Lily. At least, that's what I told myself every time I left home. Marcy wasn't thrilled about my job, but she said she understood. She said she appreciated the life I was building for us. I believed her. I believed everything she said. Turns out, I was an idiot. I never saw it coming. Marcy and I had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I thought we were solid. She was my anchor when the road got lonely. I'd call her every night, tell her about the places I'd seen, the weather, the diner food that got worse every year. She'd laugh, tell me about her day, and promise to have something warm waiting for me when I got back. Looking back, maybe I missed the signs. She'd gotten distant over the last year, but I chalked it up to the stress of raising two kids mostly on her own. I even blamed myself. Thought I wasn't giving her enough attention. I tried to make it up to her when I was home, date nights, helping with the girls, little gifts to show her I was thinking of her. But none of it mattered. She had already moved on. And the worst part? She didn't just betray me with anyone. She betrayed me with Jack, my co-driver. My friend. Jack and I had been hauling together for almost 3 years. He was rough around the edges, but I trusted him. On the road, trust is everything. If something goes wrong, you've got to know the guy next to you has your back. Turns out, he had my wife's back instead. It all unraveled on a cold Tuesday night in Montana. We'd parked the rig at a truck stop just outside Billings, grabbing some shut-eye before our next run. My phone buzzed with a notification, one of those automatic alerts from the home security camera. Normally, I wouldn't even check it, but something told me to that night. Call it intuition or dumb luck, but I opened the app. There they were. Marcy and Jack in my kitchen, laughing, drinking, and touching. It felt like someone poured ice water over my head. My heart raced as I watched them, my fingers tightening around the phone until I thought it might snap. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The betrayal was so blatant, so casual. It wasn't a one-time thing. You don't act like that with someone unless you've been at it for a while. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my life fell apart. I didn't confront her right away. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd say, what I'd do. Instead, I drove home the next morning without saying a word to Jack. I told the dispatcher I was sick and needed time off, then headed straight to our house. When I walked in, the look on Marcy's face told me everything I needed to know. This was just the beginning. Marcy froze when I walked through the door. She had the nerve to look surprised, like she wasn't expecting me to be there. The girls were at school, so it was just us. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "You're home early," she said, her voice a little too high, her hands fidgeting with the dish towel she was holding. "Yeah," I replied, my voice calm. Too calm. Thought I'd surprise my family. Her eyes darted around, like she was looking for an escape route. "Well, you should have called." "I could have." "I saw you, Marcy." The words stopped her mid-sentence. Her face turned pale, then red, like a kid caught stealing cookies. "What are you talking about?" Don't even try to play dumb." I pulled out my phone and opened the security footage, showing her the video. Her and Jack. My best friend and my wife. Right there in my kitchen. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry or apologize like I thought she would. Instead, she crossed her arms, her chin lifting slightly. "So what? You've been gone for weeks at a time, Heath. What did you expect?" That hit me like a punch in the gut. What did I expect? I expected you to honor our marriage vows. I expected you to respect me enough not to bring him into my home, around my kids. That's what I expected. She rolled her eyes, of all things. "Don't act so high and mighty. You're never here. You're always on the road, leaving me to do everything by myself. Jack was there for me when you weren't." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't buying the victim act. "Don't you dare put this on me, Marcy. I've been out there busting my back to provide for this family. You think it's easy being away from Grace and Lily? You think I like missing birthdays and school plays? I did it for us. For you. And this is how you repay me. Marcy didn't say anything. She just stood there, her face a mix of defiance and guilt. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to let the rage boiling inside me explode. But I held it back. Instead, I turned and headed for the stairs. Where are you going? She called after me. To pack, I said without looking back. I threw some clothes into a bag and grabbed a few things I couldn't leave behind. My dad's old pocket knife, a photo of the girls, and the necklace Grace made me last Christmas. As I was zipping up the bag, Marcy appeared in the doorway. So that's it? You're just leaving, she asked, her tone accusatory. I need to think, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Think about what? You're overreacting. It's not like I love him. That stopped me in my tracks. I turned to face her, my jaw tightening. You don't love him? That's supposed to make this better? You betrayed me, Marcy. You betrayed us. You betrayed our daughters. Her face softened at the mention of the girls, but she still didn't apologize. You can't tell them, she said quickly. They don't need to know. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of her request. I'm not going to tell them, I said finally. Not yet. But don't think for a second that this is over. I walked past her, my bag slung over my shoulder. As I reached the door, she called out, Where are you going? To figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do next, I replied, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with anger, betrayal, and heartache. I thought about Grace and Lily, how this was going to turn their lives upside down. I thought about Jack, the man I trusted like a brother, and how he'd looked me in the eye every day knowing what he was doing behind my back. But mostly, I thought about Marcy, the woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. How had it all gone so wrong? I didn't plan on confronting Jack that night. I was too raw, too angry, and I knew if I saw him, I might do something I'd regret. But as I sat in my truck at a roadside diner, staring blankly at a plate of untouched fries, my phone buzzed. It was him. Hey buddy, his message read. Dispatcher said you're off sick. Everything okay? The nerve of that man. My blood boiled as I gripped my phone. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. It was almost laughable, him pretending to care, playing innocent. Without thinking, I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Heath. Man, what's going on? Jack's voice was casual, like he hadn't been screwing my wife in my own house. Where are you? I asked, my voice cold. At home. Why? I'm coming over. Heath is something. I hung up before he could finish. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel and pulled out of the diner parking lot. It wasn't long before I was pulling into Jack's driveway, my headlights cutting through the darkness. He came to the door before I could even knock, his face lighting up with a smile that quickly faltered when he saw mine. Heath? What the? I didn't give him a chance to finish. I shoved him hard, sending him stumbling back into the hallway. What the hell, man? He stammered, his hands up defensively. What's going on? You tell me, I growled, stepping inside and slamming the door behind me. You tell me what the hell is going on, Jack. Or should I call you Mr. Homewrecker? His face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. My voice was louder than I intended, but I didn't care. I saw the footage. You and Marcy. In my house. My kitchen. Jack froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't mean for it to happen, he finally stammered. It just did. Oh, it just did. I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You tripped and fell into my wife? Is that how it works now? He flinched at my words, his face red with shame, or maybe fear. Look, Heath, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. You didn't want to hurt me? Jack, you slept with my wife. You betrayed me. You betrayed my daughters. And you didn't think that would hurt. I know I screwed up, he said, his voice shaking. I don't know what else to say. There's nothing you can say, I replied. You destroyed everything, Jack. You destroyed our friendship. You destroyed my family. He lowered his head, his hands clenching into fists. I didn't mean for it to get this far. How far, exactly? I demanded. How long has this been going on? He hesitated, then muttered, "A few months. A few months." I took a step closer, my fists itching to wipe the smug regret off his face. "You've been stabbing me in the back for months, and now you think sorry is going to fix it?" Jack didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at the floor like a scolded child. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to break something. But instead, I turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. As I got back into my truck, I could see him standing in the doorway, watching me leave. For a brief moment, I thought about going back, about giving him the beating he deserved. But I didn't. I had bigger things to worry about than Jack. Like how to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. When I got home that night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Grace and Lily were asleep, and Marcy was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching it. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes puffy from crying. "Heath," she said softly, sitting up. "We need to talk." I dropped my keys on the table and stood there, staring at her. I didn't have the energy for another confrontation, but I also knew we couldn't avoid it forever. "You're right," I said finally. "We do." She gestured to the couch, but I stayed where I was. The distance felt safer. "I know I messed up," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. I don't even know where to start. How about the truth?" I replied, my voice cold. "You could start there, Marcy." She nodded, wringing her hands. "It wasn't planned, Heath. I swear. It just happened." "Stop saying that," I snapped, my anger bubbling back to the surface. "Nothing just happens, Marcy. You made a choice. Every time you saw him, every time you texted him, every time you let him touch you, you chose him over me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. "I didn't mean to fall for him," she said. "I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." My stomach twisted at her words. "Fall for him." I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "So it wasn't just physical?" She shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't like that. I mean, maybe at first, but—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't need the details. What I need to know is how you thought this was okay. How you could betray me like this. Betray our girls." She flinched at the mention of Grace and Lily. "They don't know," she said quickly. "And they don't need to. This doesn't have to affect them, Heath. We can work through this. Work through this." I repeated, incredulous. "Marcy, you slept with my friend. My co-driver. How am I supposed to work through that? How am I supposed to trust you ever again?" She had no answer for that. Instead, she wiped her eyes and tried a different tactic. "Think about the girls," she pleaded. "Think about what this will do to them if we break up. They need both of us, Heath. You should have thought about them before you started sneaking around," I shot back. "Don't put this on me. You made this mess." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I stood up. "I'm staying for the girls for now," I said. "But don't think for a second that I've forgiven you. We're not okay, Marcy. And I don't know if we ever will be." She looked like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and went upstairs, closing the door to the guest room behind me. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but for the sake of Grace and Lily, I had to figure out a way to keep going. Even if it meant sharing a roof with the woman who'd shattered my heart. The next few days passed in a haze. I threw myself into taking care of Grace and Lily, trying to shield them from the tension between Marcy and me. They were smart girls, though, too smart to miss the way I avoided their mom, or the way she avoided me. "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" Grace asked one night while I was tucking her in. Her big brown eyes looked up at me, full of worry, and it broke my heart. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, brushing her hair back. "We're just going through a tough time right now. But don't you worry, okay? I'm here for you and Lily, always." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Kids always know when something's wrong, even when you try to hide it. Meanwhile, Marcy kept her distance, which suited me just fine. But that didn't mean I wasn't watching her. Every time she picked up her phone, my chest tightened. Was she texting Jack? Calling him? Part of me wanted to grab the phone out of her hands and check, but I didn't want to stoop to her level. It wasn't until Saturday morning that everything started unraveling faster than I expected. I was out in the garage, working on the girls' bikes, when Lily came running in, holding Marcy's phone. "Daddy, Mommy left her phone on the counter, and it keeps buzzing." I froze, wiping my hands on a rag as she handed me the phone. Sure enough, the screen lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Unknown number, can we talk? I miss you." My blood ran cold. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I looked at Lily, who was watching me with wide eyes. "Thanks, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you go play outside for a bit? I'll take care of this." She nodded and skipped off, leaving me alone with the phone. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Marcy hadn't bothered to change her passcode. The messages confirmed my worst fears. "Jack, I hate how we left things. Call me when you can. Jack, you know I still care about you, right? Jack, are you okay? Did Heath say anything?" There were no replies from Marcy, at least not in this thread, but that didn't make me feel any better. The fact that Jack felt comfortable texting her like this told me everything I needed to know. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the screen. I told myself I'd stay for the girls, but how was I supposed to live under the same roof as someone who couldn't even cut ties with the man who destroyed our family? I heard the back door open, and a moment later, Marcy walked into the garage. She froze when she saw me holding her phone. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Reading your boyfriend's texts," I replied coldly, holding up the screen for her to see. "Care to explain?" Her face turned pale, and she reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Heath, it's not what you think," she said quickly. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult my intelligence, Marcy. He's texting you about missing you, about caring for you, and you expect me to believe there's nothing going on." "I haven't replied to him," she said defensively. "That doesn't matter." I shouted, my voice echoing in the garage. "You should have blocked him the second I found out about the affair. But no, you've been keeping this door open, haven't you? Hoping you can have your little side piece while I take care of the kids and pay the bills." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. She had made her choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. "I can't do this anymore, Marcy," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "I was willing to stay for Grace and Lily, but you've made it impossible. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. "Heath, please. Don't do this. I'll block him. I'll cut him off. Just give me one more chance." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. You should have thought about the consequences before you threw everything away." Without another word, I walked out of the garage, leaving her standing there, sobbing. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew I couldn't keep living like this. It was time to start taking my life back. For me. For my daughters. And for the future we deserved. Filing for divorce wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration. A line in the sand. The moment I told Marcy, it felt like the weight of the world shifted, though not entirely lifted. The truth was, I had no idea what the road ahead looked like. I just knew I couldn't keep driving down the one I was on. That Monday, I took a day off work and headed to a lawyer's office. The receptionist greeted me with a smile that faded when I explained why I was there. Within minutes, I was sitting across from a sharp-looking man in his late 50s named Tom Daniels. His office was neat, with framed degrees on the wall and bookshelves packed with legal texts. "So Heath," Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The affair, the betrayal, the texts, everything. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, he nodded. "It's clear you've been through a lot. The good news is, Montana is a no-fault divorce state. The bad news is, that doesn't mean this will be easy. If you're serious about custody of your daughters, you'll need to prove you're the better option for their well-being. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "They're my priority." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Good. Here's what we'll do. First, we'll file the paperwork. Then we'll gather evidence to show the affair and its impact on the home environment. We'll also need to discuss your financial situation and living arrangements." Living arrangements. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even thought about where I'd go. Would I leave the house? Would Marcy? How would the girls handle it? Tom must have seen the worry on my face. "It's going to be tough," he said, his tone gentler now. "But you're doing the right thing. Kids are resilient, especially when they know one parent is fighting for them. We spent the next hour going over details. By the time I left his office, my head was spinning, but I felt a sliver of clarity. The wheels were in motion. Back at the house, things were tense. Marcy hadn't brought up the divorce since our blow-up in the garage, but the silence between us spoke volumes. She spent most of her time in the bedroom, leaving me to handle the girls. It was awkward, but I'd rather deal with that than listen to her excuses. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marcy finally broke the silence. She came downstairs while I was nursing a beer at the kitchen table. "Did you really go see a lawyer?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," I replied without looking at her. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "Heath, can't we at least try counseling? For the kids?" I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Counseling can't fix this, Marcy. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice." Over and over again. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. "I'll always be their father," I continued. "And I'll do everything in my power to make sure they're okay. But you and me? We're done." She didn't say anything else, just nodded and went back upstairs. I stayed at the table, staring at the empty beer bottle in front of me. I knew this was only the beginning. There would be fights, paperwork, and more painful conversations ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of standing still. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I had now. And I was determined to make the best of it, for me, and for my girls. Telling Grace and Lily about the divorce was something I dreaded more than anything else. I'd replayed the conversation in my head 100 times, but no matter how I framed it, I knew it would break their hearts. Marcy and I agreed we'd sit down together and talk to them. It was the least we could do, to show a united front, even if we were anything but united. She suggested we wait until the weekend, but I didn't see the point in dragging it out. That Friday evening, we sat down in the living room after dinner. Grace and Lily were on the couch, Grace holding her stuffed unicorn and Lily fidgeting with her favorite bracelet. They looked at us with wide, curious eyes, oblivious to the storm about to hit. "Girls," I began, my voice steady but my hands shaking. "Mommy and I need to talk to you about something important." They exchanged a quick glance. "Are we in trouble?" Lily asked. "No, sweetheart," Marcy said, forcing a smile. "This isn't about you. It's about Mommy and Daddy." Grace's expression grew serious. "Are you guys getting a divorce?" Her question hit like a gut punch. I hadn't expected her to guess, not at her age. But Grace had always been sharp, always paying attention to the things we thought she didn't notice. Marcy's face crumpled, and I knew she wouldn't be able to say it. So I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, honey. We are." Lily's lower lip trembled, and she immediately climbed into my lap. Grace stayed where she was, her face pale. "Why?" she asked quietly. "It's complicated," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they used to. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. You and your sister are the most important things in our lives. That will never change." "Is it because of the fighting?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. Marcy wiped her eyes. "It's not your fault, Grace. None of this is your fault." Lily buried her face in my chest, her tiny hands clutching at my shirt. "Are you leaving, Daddy?" Her words nearly broke me. "No, sweetie," I said firmly. "I'm not leaving you or Grace. Things are going to be different, but I'll still be here for you. Always." The conversation lasted longer than I thought it would. There were tears, questions, and long silences where none of us knew what to say. By the time the girls were in bed, I felt like I'd run a marathon. Later that night, I sat outside on the back porch, staring at the stars. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I thought about Grace's question, why? The truth was, I didn't know how to explain it to them. How do you tell your kids that their mom betrayed you? That she chose someone else over the life you built together? I didn't want them to hate Marcy, no matter how much I struggled with my own feelings. She was still their mom, and they deserved to love her without the shadow of our mistakes hanging over them. The door creaked open, and Marcy stepped onto the porch. She was wearing her robe, her arms wrapped around herself. "How did we get here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. What was there to say? She sat down next to me, the silence stretching between us. I didn't want this for them, she said after a while. I thought I could keep it from affecting them. I turned to her, my jaw tightening. You thought you could have an affair and keep it from affecting them? How did you think that was going to work, Marcy? She flinched, but I didn't let up. Everything we do affects them. Every fight, every lie, every choice we make, it shapes their world. And you didn't think about that, did you? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I know I messed up, Heath, she said. But they still need both of us. Can't we try to make this as easy on them as possible? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. That's the only thing we agree on. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they're okay. But don't think for a second that I'm doing it for you. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked defeated. As she went back inside, I stayed on the porch, staring at the stars and wondering how we were going to navigate the mess she'd made. For Grace and Lily's sake, I had to figure it out. One way or another. The divorce paperwork had been filed, but I knew the real fight was just beginning: custody. There was no way I was going to be a weekend dad. Grace and Lily needed stability, and I wasn't going to let Marcy's poor choices dictate their lives. Tom, my lawyer, had already warned me that custody battles could get messy, even in no-fault states. Be prepared, he said during our last meeting. If she fights for primary custody, it's going to come down to who can prove they're the more stable, responsible parent. It sounded simple, but nothing about this situation felt simple. 2 weeks after we told the girls about the divorce, Marcy dropped her first bombshell: she wanted the house. I think it's best for the girls if they stay in their home, she said one morning over coffee. It was the first time we'd spoken more than a few words in days. I put my mug down slowly, staring at her. And where exactly am I supposed to go, Marcy? Live out of my truck. She hesitated, fiddling with the hem of her sweater. You're the one who wanted the divorce. I'm just trying to do what's best for the kids. That phrase, what's best for the kids, was starting to sound like nails on a chalkboard. It was her go-to justification for everything, even when it had nothing to do with the kids at all. The kids don't need this house, I said firmly. They need stability. They need both parents in their lives. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you walk away with the house and primary custody, you're out of your mind. Her face hardened. So, you want to uproot them? Drag them into some apartment while you figure out your life? No, Marcy, I shot back. I want to provide for them. Like I've been doing this whole time while you were sneaking around with Jack. She flinched at his name, but I didn't let up. You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to decide what's best for Grace and Lily when you couldn't even think about them while you were destroying our family. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I'll see you in court, I said flatly, grabbing my jacket and heading out the door. The custody hearing was scheduled a month later, and in the meantime, I focused on gathering everything Tom said I'd need: financial records, school reports, even testimony from friends who could vouch for my character. Marcy had the upper hand when it came to being physically present for the girls, but I wasn't going down without a fight. One night, as I was sorting through a stack of paperwork, the phone buzzed. It was Maureen, Marcy's younger sister. We hadn't talked much since the divorce news broke, but she'd always been good to me and the girls. Hey Heath, she said when I picked up. How are you holding up? I sighed, rubbing my eyes. It's a lot. But I'm managing. Listen, she said, her voice hesitant. I've been meaning to tell you something. I don't know if it'll help, but I thought you should know. What is it? I asked, sitting up straighter. Marcy's been talking to Jack again, she said quietly. I overheard her on the phone with him last week. She was saying she didn't know what to do about the custody stuff, and he was telling her to fight for everything she could get. My grip tightened on the phone. She's still talking to him? I'm sorry, Heath, Maureen said. I thought she'd cut him off, but clearly she hasn't. I just thought you should know. For the girls' sake. Thanks, Maureen, I said, my jaw clenched. I appreciate you telling me. After we hung up, I stared at the phone, my mind racing. I didn't want to drag Jack into the custody battle, but if Marcy was taking advice from him, it was relevant. I made a note to tell Tom about Maureen's tip. If this custody fight was going to be about who could provide the most stable environment, then Marcy's ongoing connection to Jack was fair game. The fight wasn't just about the house or custody, it was about proving I could give Grace and Lily the life they deserved. And for them, I was ready to do whatever it took. even if it meant airing every painful detail of Marcy's betrayal in front of a judge. This wasn't the battle I wanted, but it was the battle I was prepared to win. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Or maybe it was just me. Sitting at the table with Tom, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Across from me sat Marcy, her face pale but composed. She barely looked at me, her focus glued to the papers in front of her and the lawyer she'd hired, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who exuded confidence. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Tom had warned me that this wouldn't be a quick process. Custody hearings are as much about perception as they are about facts, and Marcy's lawyer wasted no time painting her as the perfect mother. She emphasized how Marcy had been the girl's primary caregiver while I was away on the road, and how she'd maintained their routine and stability. She has always prioritized the children's well-being, her lawyer said smoothly, glancing at the judge. I clenched my fists under the table. Sure, Marcy had been the one home with the kids, but that didn't erase everything I'd done for our family. When it was Tom's turn, he stood and began laying out our case. He talked about my consistent financial support, my involvement in the girls' education, and the steps I'd already taken to adjust my work schedule so I could be more present in their lives. But it was when he brought up Marcy's affair that the room seemed to shift. Your Honor, Tom said, his voice calm but firm, while it's not my client's intent to disparage Ms. Reynolds, her actions are relevant when considering the stability of the home environment. The affair, conducted in their marital home, raises questions about her judgment and priorities. Marcy's lawyer immediately objected, calling it irrelevant. But Tom was ready. This isn't about morality, he said. It's about establishing which parent can provide the more stable environment moving forward. Ms. Reynolds maintained contact with her affair partner even after being confronted, which demonstrates a lack of consideration for the emotional impact on her children. The judge allowed it, and I caught a glimpse of Marcy's face, her jaw tight, her cheeks flushed. Over the next few hours, we both presented our evidence. My finances were solid, and I had a clean record of support payments, attendance at school events, and involvement in the girls' activities when I was home. Tom even called Morin to the stand as a witness. I love my sister, Morin said, her voice steady, but I've seen firsthand how her actions have affected Heath and the girls. He's a good father, dedicated, loving, and willing to do whatever it takes to ensure they have a stable, happy life. Marcy's lawyer cross-examined her, trying to downplay the affair and its relevance. But Morin held her ground, refusing to let the conversation shift away from what was best for the kids. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, I felt like I'd been through a war. That night, I sat in my truck outside a diner, staring at a cup of coffee I didn't have the stomach to drink. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Morin. Morin, you did great today. Proud of you. The girls are lucky to have you. Her words brought a small, unexpected smile to my face. I hadn't smiled in weeks, and it felt foreign, almost wrong. But it also felt good. I texted back a quick thank you, then put my phone down and leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. I thought about Grace and Lily, how much I wanted to protect them, how much they deserved to grow up in a home that wasn't weighed down by lies and tension. This fight wasn't over yet, but I wasn't backing down. Not for a second. The day the judge was supposed to rule on custody, I barely slept. I got up before dawn, pacing the house while the girls slept upstairs. Marcy stayed in the bedroom, probably as nervous as I was, though she'd never admit it. When I finally walked into the courtroom, my heart was pounding. Tom gave me a reassuring nod, but my palms were slick with sweat. Across the room, Marcy sat stiffly, her lawyer whispering something in her ear. The judge entered, and we all stood. After going through the formalities, he began to deliver his decision. Both parents have demonstrated care and concern for the children's well-being, he said, his voice calm but firm. However, stability and the ability to provide a nurturing environment are paramount in determining custody. I held my breath as he continued. Based on the evidence presented, the court awards joint legal custody, with primary physical custody granted to Mr. Heath Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds will have regular visitation rights, as outlined in the schedule provided. The words didn't register at first. It wasn't until Tom clapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "You got it," that it hit me. I'd won. Marcy looked devastated. She turned to me, her eyes red, but I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. This wasn't about her, it was about Grace and Lily. Later that evening, as I tucked the girls into bed, Grace looked up at me and asked, "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" I kissed her forehead and nodded. Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. I promise. For the first time in months, I felt like I could actually keep that promise. Winning custody felt like a victory, but it was also the start of a new chapter, a hard one. The girls and I stayed in the house, but it felt emptier without Marcy. She'd moved into an apartment across town, and while she had regular visitation, the transition was rough on Grace and Lily. At first, they were confused. They missed her, even though they never said it outright. Grace threw herself into school and her art projects, while Lily became clingier, following me around the house like a shadow. One night, as I was helping Lily with a puzzle, she blurted out, "Do you think Mommy still loves us?" Her words stopped me cold. I crouched down beside her, looking her in the eye. "Of course she does, sweetheart. Your mom loves you both very much. She always will. But why can't we all live together?" she asked, her voice trembling. I hugged her tightly, wishing I had a better answer. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they should, but that doesn't change how much we love you. You and Grace are the most important things in the world to us. As the weeks went by, we started to find a rhythm. I adjusted my trucking schedule, sticking to shorter runs that let me be home more often. It wasn't easy financially, but it was worth it to be there for the girls. Maureen became a surprising source of support during that time. She'd swing by to help with dinner or homework, bringing her easygoing presence that seemed to calm the girls. They adored her, and I couldn't deny how much I appreciated her help. One Saturday, as we watched the girls paint in the backyard, she turned to me and said, "You're doing a great job, Heath. They're lucky to have you." I smiled faintly. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. It's hard to know if I'm getting it right. She nudged my shoulder. "You're there for them. That's what matters most." I nodded, grateful for her words. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. Months passed, and slowly, the new normal began to take shape. The girls adjusted to their routine, splitting time between me and Marcy. It wasn't perfect, but they seemed to be settling in. Grace, ever the thoughtful one, started opening up more. "Daddy," she said one evening while doing her homework, "I like it when you're home all the time now." Her words caught me off guard. I'd worried that stepping back from long-haul trucking might make things harder for us financially, but hearing her say that made it clear I'd made the right choice. Lily, meanwhile, started sleeping with her door open. "So I can hear you," she explained. It broke my heart, but I made sure to check on her every night, tucking her in and whispering that I loved her. Maureen was becoming a bigger part of our lives, too. She'd stop by for dinner at least once a week, often bringing dessert or some small gift for the girls. It was natural, easy, and before long, the girls were asking when Auntie Maureen would visit next. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, we sat on the porch, sipping coffee under the stars. "You've been a lifesaver, you know that?" I said, glancing over at her. She smiled. "I just want to help. You've been through so much, and the girls, they deserve the best." We sat in comfortable silence for a while before she said, almost hesitantly, "You're doing better, Heath. I can see it." I thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "I think I am. It's not easy, but I'm getting there." Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Maureen had always been there for me, even during the worst of it, and the idea of leaning on her felt right. But I wasn't sure if I was ready, or if she'd even feel the same way. For now, I decided to focus on the girls and the life we were building together. Whatever came next, whatever the future held, I'd face it one step at a time. As life settled into a routine, I started thinking about ways to secure a stable future for Grace and Lily. With my trucking schedule scaled back, I knew I needed something closer to home, something that would let me be the dad they needed while still keeping food on the table. One day, while I was driving back from a school drop-off, I passed an old rundown gas station on the edge of town. The for sale sign was barely hanging on, but something about it caught my attention. That night, I mentioned it to Maureen over dinner. "A gas station?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not just a gas station," I explained. "It's got space for a diner and even a trucker's lounge. With the right work, it could be more than just a pit stop. It could be a community hub. Drivers like me would love a place like that, and it'd keep me close to the girls." Maureen tilted her head, considering. "It's ambitious, but I think you could do it. You've always had a way of making things work, Heath." Her encouragement lit a spark. The next day, I called the number on the sign and scheduled a tour. The place was in rough shape, rusted pumps, cracked windows, and a roof that looked like it hadn't been fixed in decades. But I could see its potential. I scraped together my savings and applied for a small business loan. Tom, my lawyer, helped me navigate the paperwork, and within a month, I was the proud, if slightly nervous owner of the property. The girls were excited when I told them. Grace immediately started brainstorming names for the station, while Lily wanted to know if we could serve pancakes in the diner. "We'll see," I told her with a laugh. Morin offered to help with the planning, and before I knew it, she was at the station with me almost every day. Together, we cleaned, painted, and replaced what we could on a tight budget. Word spread through town, and neighbors started stopping by to pitch in. One day, as we stood back to admire the freshly painted sign that read "Circumstances, Fuel, Food, and Friends," Morin turned to me with a smile. "You've built something special here, Heath," she said softly. I looked at her, then at the station, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "We've built something special," I corrected, giving her a small smile. As the gas station neared completion, I started to realize that Circumstances wasn't just a business, it was a new beginning. For me, for my girls, and maybe even for Morin. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The grand opening of Circumstances was a bigger event than I expected. Friends, neighbors, and even some truckers I'd worked with over the years showed up to see what we'd built. Grace and Lily helped cut the ribbon, their laughter ringing out as the crowd clapped and cheered. For the first time in months, I felt like things were falling into place. The diner became a hit almost immediately. Morin worked the weekends with me, helping manage orders and chatting with customers. Truckers loved the cozy lounge we'd set up, and locals appreciated having a new spot for coffee and conversation. One evening, as we were closing up, Morin sat down across from me, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "You've got something good here, Heath. People love it." Every day felt like another step forward, another layer of stability we'd built together. For the first time, I could see a brighter future ahead, for all of us.